Hi, everybody. We're going to be talking about genetics now. We are going to first start talking about Mendelian genetics, or just Mendel, and like what he did, and then I'll flip the camera around and show you like how that works. All right. Also, I wanted to say that next week's lab is genetics lab, and that lab has a lot of things that you were supposed to just do together. So just do make sure you look over the traits and that you were supposed to look at, and do them for yourself. And then the other things about the genetics lab are make sure you understand blood typing, which we will go over in the next couple of lectures. And you also need to understand about what a karyotype is, what uh, uh, like a genetic tree, or a tree that is showing you like the different generations and what people are doing in each generation. So we'll like kind of go over what each of those are. I didn't say that very well, but I'll go over that again. I will flip the camera around sometime in the next like couple of days worth of lectures to show you the lab book and show you some of the things that I'm talking about. Okay, so let's just first start talking about Mendel. Mendel actually he was a monk that lived in a monastery, and he was working. He was like the gardener, the apothecary, and what that meant was he took care of the gardens there and made medicines and things like that. And he was working in the garden, and he noticed some things about garden peas that struck his curiosity. And he actually ended up doing a lot of experiments over, I think it was something like a 30-year period or something like that. Anyway, a long time, where he repeated the experiments over and over, and got a great amount of data. In fact, the way that he did his experiments was one of the reasons why we came up with the idea of the scientific method, because he actually exhibited the scientific method in how he did his research. He had a very clear idea of what he was trying to look at, and then his experiments, he repeated them over and over again, and the results showed him that what his conclusions were actually coming out all the time. So we'll go over what those conclusions were. So really, Mendel was known as the father of genetics, and that's because he was one of the first people to ever describe the idea that there were factors that were combined, or factors that were used during the reproductive process, that were actually part of the what the outcome of the new generation, or that is like the new individuals that were created through the reproductive process. And he was, at that time they had done a lot of animal husbandry, plant hybridization, and so forth, and they knew that there were things that were gotten from each parent that were combined, but they actually just really had no idea how that happened. So at this point, he was kind of just theorizing about how that could occur. Just a little bit about how he did it. Since he was working with garden peas have very unusual petal formation. Most of you might not know about flowers, but flowers have the colored parts that are the petals. Most of you do know that. And the inside part are the reproductive parts. They have male and female parts that are found in the middle part of the flower. And in the pea, the reproductive parts are enclosed. So they're enclosed in two petals that are form a line down the middle called a septum that is combined and enclosing the male and female parts. So in nature, unless there's a very vigorous bee that breaks that septum, what happens is those flower parts are self-fertilizing. That means that the plant will breed true, or have the same things that they're passing to themselves, and basically doing the reproductive process just within themselves. So in essence, kind of like a clone. But if that opens up and the male and female parts are exposed, then pollen from one flower could get to another flower, and there could be a mix of combinations. So most of the time with the garden pea, that doesn't occur. All right. So what Mendel had to do was he had to go in and cut open these little septum and collect all the stamens, which are the male parts, and the pollen from that in little containers. And that left the female parts exposed. Then he had to cover the flowers so that they wouldn't get pollen from someplace else. And then he took a paintbrush and actually pollinated the flowers, or did the crosses that he wanted to do. So it was like kind of a painstaking thing to do. So just to kind of put it in perspective of how much work he actually did. All right, so let's turn this camera around.